Today I'm joined by Nico Agosta. So just about 2.5 months ago, I think you started stalking the Capitol, and now you're at 160,000 TikTok subscribers, 110,000 Instagram subscribers. Could you tell us just a little bit more about what you do?
Is your member of Congress a piece of shit? Is your member of Congress a piece of shit? Today we're going to be grading the financial integrity of Dusty Johnson, Becca Ballant, Burgess Owens. So let's dive into his finances. Over 76% of those funds came from PACs, $109 million net worth. She does not hold or trade any individual stocks. He bought shares of Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, Salesforce, and Amazon. She also receives over $1 million of corporate PAC money. This high volume buying and selling of stock in such a short time frame is a major red flag.
What was your inspiration? Did you always know you wanted to be a content creator and that was just a good niche, or were you specifically sort of pursuing the goal of finding corruption in the Capitol?
Yeah, definitely didn't envision becoming a content creator in any way. It essentially came from a Twitter scroll. I was scrolling on Twitter. I saw a tweet by Bernie Sanders criticizing Elon Musk. I don't remember the exact tweet, but I did something you should never do on Twitter. I went into the comments, right, and it was just a stream of disinformation. Um, some of it about the amount of donations that Bernie Sanders had gotten from the pharmaceutical industry, some of it, inflating his net worth. And these were claims that I was almost certain were false. So I just went to, sources that I was familiar with from my time working in politics. So opensecrets.com, the FEC website, and was pretty easily able to find that this information was, completely incorrect. But at the same time, I did see where some of this disinformation could come from. Um, just working with some of these sources, they can be a bit confusing to someone that, doesn't use them frequently. So I had the idea essentially to make a website that was going to be much easier to navigate for someone that, maybe didn't have a lot of time to do research or just wasn't familiar with, financial, the campaign finance law, for example. But I don't know how to build websites. So it quickly turned into an idea for a web series. So that's kind of how it all got started. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And I think you could get a lot more following much faster that way.
Yeah, for
How
sure.
are the comments? Do people believe like, are there claims you're spreading misinformation, or people are generally receptive to what you're saying?
I would say most of the comments are very receptive to what I'm saying. I think it kind of struck a chord with people kind of all over the political spectrum. I obviously do get comments that say, this isn't true or what you made up, you're making all this up. Um, they don't they don't get much traction. I don't really pay too much attention to those claims, but sometimes there is criticism about the inputs that are in my my formula or the information I'm presenting in the video. And obviously, I take those seriously. And the formula has changed over the last few months with the last update coming at the start of this month. So I definitely take the some of the criticism, but some of it is on the internet. You're always going to get a few comments that are just kind of absurd, but you just have to roll with it.
Welcome to Untangling Podcast. This is a new channel, so I have a small favor to ask you. Could you please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below to let me know what you think of this episode? This will really help more people find this channel and watch my content. I really appreciate it and enjoy the video. What was the formula's evolution and what is it right now?
Yeah, so it's all about how many inputs I can get into the formula that are consistent, inputs that every member of Congress is going to have. Um, so right now, what goes into the formula is the percentage of funds they get from PACs. That's all types of PACs. So that's ideological PACs, corporate PACs, the PACs of labor unions, the percentage of funds they get from small individual donors, percentage of funds they get from large individual donors. So that would be for small individual donors, that'd be under $200. For large individual donors, that would be anything from $201 to the max donation for an individual, which is $6,600. And that goes all into what I call their funding health. And then separately, you have the amount that they hold in individual stocks and the amount of trades they've made. That's their stock score. And then finally, you have the amount of money they've gotten from corporate PACs, their corporate PAC score. That is a very heavy penalty. And then there is an additional 10 points they can get. I call it the ethical score boost. Basically, it's if they abstain from any of those practices I deem to be a conflict of interest. So if they take absolutely zero corporate PAC money, or if they hold and trade zero individual stocks, they can get a slight score boost. So that produces a score between 0 and 100. And then in my videos, I give out a letter grade correspondingly.
I feel like I've watched most of your videos. It's like overwhelmingly, it's an Fs throughout the board, with some exceptions. Um, I also saw that sometimes you have, in terms of how they fundraise for their campaign, the other sort of sources. What are those?
Yeah. So when I said, the goal is to get as many inputs as possible into the formula, that's definitely something that's I want to incorporate more in the future iterations of the formula, because there is this other category. It's almost always a joint fundraising committee. Excuse me, a joint fundraising committee. Um, so this doesn't allow members of Congress to get around the fundraising limit. They still have to respect that $6,600 per individual. But it does make the information a bit harder to track. You have to, now look at two pools of money coming in. So if you're trying to break it down by small individual donations, large individual donations, and corporate donors, it just adds an extra step. And also, Open Secrets doesn't do the same breakdown of data that they do for the campaign committee. So I have to do that myself going into the raw FEC data. So it just adds time. And then it could also be from their leadership pack, which again, just it just adds it adds something to their campaign finance data that could not be consistent. Like, not all members use a leadership fund, so then essentially I need to figure out a way to consistently incorporate that into the formula, even though every member of Congress, their fundraising looks slightly different.
Mm-hmm. And is leadership fund, is that a good thing? Is it pretty neutral, or is it kind of a red flag as well?
Yeah, leadership packs have been criticized in the past. They essentially, some people liken them to like slush funds, essentially. So there's pretty strict rules about how much, can be donated to a leadership pack. They're not like super PACs. You can't get unlimited donations or anything like that. Um, but oftentimes they'll be putting on these kind of upscale events using the money from the pack. And essentially, the criticism is, okay, is this dinner really about fundraising, or are you just having like a really nice dinner? Is this a party, right? Or are you, doing this event, on location, at some resort, again, to raise money? Is this political, or are you just spending money on nice things? So yeah, there's been some research done. Issue One, an organization in DC, has done some great research on leadership packs and kind of some of the drawbacks. But again, people use them differently. Some people use them, quote, like the right way, which is to raise money for other members of Congress that are in kind of your coalition, whether that's just your party or whether that's a certain subsect of your party. But a lot of folks kind of use them the wrong way.
Got it. And I was looking into different ways somebody could raise money. One of the ways highlighted was getting money from your party. Does that happen a lot? And is that something you track in your evaluations?
So that's a good question. Right now, it's not tracked. So that's again just luckily, when I'm looking at the breakdown, if you look at that other category, usually it is other, under 5%, under 3%. So when I do get to a member of Congress that I feel like the formula can't really accurately depict their campaign finance situation, I have the privilege right now where I have 538 members of Congress to choose from. So I just kind of I wait on them. I take a pass on them for now, because that is something we do want to track, and I have to make a value judgment, right? If money's coming from the party, is that better than an individual donating the max to that member of Congress? Does it pose a conflict of interest in any way? Off the top of my head, I can say I don't know if it poses much of a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime I add in an input to the formula, there has to be a value judgment made about whether it's a positive thing or if it's a negative thing. And sometimes I do reach out to experts in the field and get their opinion on it. But that's going to be that's going to, for some members of Congress, going to have to be a judgment call that's made.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like if your party is giving you money, you already belong to that party. I'd imagine that's a pretty neutral donation. But that's just my personal thought. I was wondering, so in terms of ideological pacts, so corporate pacts, that's going to cost you a lot of points. Ideological pacts, is that also a withdrawal of points?
So only in that you would get more points if those funds were coming from small individual donors or large individual donors. Um, I've tried to take a step back when it comes to ideological pacts because, if someone else wants to make a very similar series where they, incorporate ideological pacts in a large way, that's basically what's going on in my comment section the entire time. Whether it's, APAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee. They have their critics, but if I'm starting to, take some sort of punitive measure in my formula for APACs, people are going to come in and say, well, what about the NRA? And then folks on the right will say, well, what about Planned Parenthood, right? So that kind of gets to this. It's so partisan in a way that I just don't think it really works with the mission um, of the channel. And also, I think that there's a direct correlation usually to ideological pacts and policy. So if you want to criticize someone because they get a lot of money from the gun lobby, you could just as easily criticize them for, the way that they vote on legislation relating to, gun safety, right? So there's another way to kind of deal with that. If you consider it to be a negative thing, there's just another way to another avenue to look at that. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where's there's some criteria that you were hoping to include initially, but sort of decided not to include it in your formula?
Um, I wouldn't say so, but there's definitely criteria that the folks in the comments or some of my viewers think should be included that's not included. So, but I still do include it in the videos often just for context. So that would be how long they've been in office, right? Folks want a penalty there. Um, but I think that if someone's been in office in a really long time, but they have a lot of, campaign finance integrity, they shouldn't be punished, right? And then net worth is another one. Folks want people with a higher net worth to be punished. I think it's great context to show the net worth of a politician, but it's not something that's actually going directly into the formula. Which people in the comments all the time think people got a poor grade because they had their net worth was overinflated, or the opposite. They think that someone should have a lower grade and they'll cite some source that has their net worth at some astronomical figure. But that's not going into the formula.
Yeah, no, totally. I think one of the curious, I don't know if that would be possible to really find that online for everybody and check that, but politicians would go to Goldman Sachs, for example. I think like Hillary Clinton went to Goldman to give a speech, and Goldman paid her $1 million for speaking fees, which is, paying for the service, but it does raise some questions. But I don't know if that's something you ever thought to include or if it would be even possible.
Oh, that's interesting. No, so sometimes I try to do a little bit of research outside of the, hard numbers before I make a video, because sometimes there will be an example of something that, obviously wouldn't apply to every member of Congress, but, maybe they embezzled funds, maybe they broke a law, there could be another factor that's not going to show up in campaign finance data that is really relevant. So I've thought about making, just as I have an ethical bonus, maybe, kind of the opposite, an ethical penalty for engaging in certain behavior. If there was a way to track that really consistently, then yeah, that could be something that would be included. I'm hoping that I want to collaborate with folks, especially experts in the field, more on the formula, because this has been something that I don't have an advanced degree in this field, and I came up with this formula. So I definitely want to get it to a point where it has as many inputs as possible that can be very, very consistent. So even if I wasn't the one looking up the data, someone else would get the exact same figure, just because the information and the sources we're getting it from are from the source directly.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So, what are your impressions so far of our congressmen, given that you've looked into a bunch of them right now?
I mean, it's not super surprising. But I think, especially when we talk about members of Congress trading stocks, I think a reason to have some optimism is that the majority of members of Congress are not trading stocks. I think that's why you've seen some traction in stock trading bans in the past. So that's, an ounce of hope there. And then also, even the amount of corporate funds that they're receiving, um, it's usually not the majority of their funds. Corporate PACs can only give a maximum of $10,000. And there's not that many major corporations in the United States. So, you're often seeing a maximum of maybe $1 million for the worst offenders coming from corporate PACs. Um, so there really is a lot of reliance on individual donors. Um, and one of the main breakdowns we see is, are they getting it from small individual donors in their district? Are they getting it from small individual donors nationwide? And then a lot of politicians are relying on those max donations from the wealthiest people, either in their district or across the country. So I think it is interesting. And that's something I want to, again, going back to the formula, start to incorporate. Are there ways that we can break down the individual donations further, as far as dishing out penalties and giving bonuses to folks? Because at the end of the day, like, most of the pie, if you look at the pie charts, is individual donors. So there is a little bit of optimism there that it's not all bad. There are members of Congress that do have more financial integrity, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. A lot of my comments, especially early on, were, it doesn't matter, they're all corrupt, right? It doesn't matter, they're all bought and paid for. And if you come in with that mindset, I mean, if your expectation is that everyone's going to be a piece of shit, as I say in my series, um, and your member of Congress is a piece of shit, your expectations have been met, right? So, and that just isn't something that we can really become accustomed to, right? We have to celebrate those who actually do have that financial integrity.
Mm-hmm. What percentage you're finding have the financial integrity, like roughly?
It depends what you want to consider. Like, sometimes I'll give someone a C, and folks in my comments will say, like, no, I love them. They're great. They're a really great representative. They should really have a B plus or a B minus. And I say, well, isn't a C a passing grade? Is that how you want to look at it? Is C passing? Um, so, if you did consider C passing, I would have to do a breakdown. I do have, I've released the spreadsheet with all the grades I've given out so far on my Substack. But just off the top of my head, I would say it's probably something like 20% are over a C. And then you do have a lot of folks in that D range. And then you have a lot of Fs. You really do have a lot of Fs. Um, so yeah, and I would consider anyone with a D or an F probably not to have financial integrity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave a link to your Substack if people want to check out the details. I was also wondering, what are maybe one or two examples of like the worst offenders and what you saw there, and maybe the best best in class A plus congressman?
Sure. Yeah. So for worst offenders, they really have to share a lot of things in common. So they have to both trade a lot of individual stocks and receive a lot of corporate funds. So you have Kevin Hearn in Oklahoma's first congressional district. He has a 19. And just for context, if some of my viewers are saying, "Wait, I thought Catherine Clark got a 7." So I've updated the formula on since April 1st, and one of the things I was focusing on was getting a more concrete 0 to 60 range. I felt like the scores that were being produced in the 0 to 60 range, I wasn't as comfortable with. So with that formula update, Catherine Clark is also still one of the worst offenders. She is a 21. So again, Kevin Hearn at a 19, Catherine Clark at a 21. And yeah, they share that in common, that they both trade millions of dollars of individual stock while having close to or over $500,000 in corporate funds as well. And then on the other side, in the A plus range, you have Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona's 5th congressional district, and then most of the members of the squad. So Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then in the Senate, Bernie Sanders. And to get into that A plus range, you really do need to have those ethical bonuses. You need to abstain from holding or trading individual stock and abstain from receiving corporate donations. So if you look at the campaign finances of everyone in that A plus range, even the videos themselves, they're pretty boring, right? I have nothing to say. They receive $0 of corporate funds. They don't hold or trade any individual stocks, right? So their campaign finances are nearly identical. The only difference is their split of individual to large donors,
Hmm.
or sorry, small or large individual donors. Yeah.
I don't know. I saw some ranked pretty well. You got, I think, a lot of views on the Bernie Sanders one. So I think
Yeah.
people like to have hope that some people adhere to the principles. Um, do you track the funds on behalf of super PACs? My understanding is a lot of those do not go directly to the campaign, but these organizations advertise on their own to promote a certain candidate.
Yeah, that's correct. So early on in the series, well, let's put it this way. So I really didn't expect the series to get as big as it did, as quick as it did, which put a lot of pressure on me immediately to make sure that the information I was putting out there was not just accurate, but comprehensive, right? I wanted to be making sure I was giving everyone the full picture. Um, and I was worried I was leaving out the super PAC funding because by law, super PACs cannot give contributions directly to um, candidates. They are independent expenditures, right? So they do all of their work independently of the candidate. So I actually called up someone that used to work in the competitive tracking department in one of my previous jobs, which is a huge industry in politics, because this super PAC money is so hard to track. So I called him up and I said, I'm doing this series. I'm tracking the money mostly that's going through their candidate committee. I feel like I'm missing out on this super PAC funding. Um, how do I track that? Should I track that? And essentially he said, like, it's called dark money for a reason. Like this money is really, really hard to track. That's why, they pay me the big bucks, right? That's why we have a competitive department. And he essentially said, um, you probably won't be able to track this in your series, especially consistently. Like if you want to give a consistent grade to everyone, have the same inputs, tracking super PAC funding is just going to be nearly impossible. Um, so I hope that that's explicit to my followers that this is another part of the picture that we aren't seeing, the super PAC funding. But I will say, most of the members of Congress I'm covering are in safe districts. That's just the way that a gerrymandered country looks. Um, and super PACs really only operate in those most competitive elections. Um, so uh, essentially, no, we're not looking at super PAC funding in this series, but I do hope to make videos outside of the stalking the Capitol series. For example, I'm considering doing a video on Elon Musk and his role in the 2024 election, where we can look at some of those super PACs and at least let's look at the dollar figures of how much they've raised. Whatever is public, we can talk about.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one interesting thing about Elon Musk participating in the election, usually you'd see these huge donors try to hide their faces and operate in the background as much as possible. With Elon Musk, it was front and center for everybody to observe, and we could just see how big of an impact I think it had in his position in the government as the new administration came into the office. Would you be able to break down just roughly what is the difference between PACs and super PACs?
Yeah, for sure. So a PAC is political action committee. They're not necessarily bad, right? The idea is basically we're going to pool together money for people that share a common interest that isn't a candidate, right? So you as just a citizen of the United States might not know the best way to support the causes that you care about, whether that's, electing Republicans nationwide, right? Or advancing, um, you know, whatever policy goal it is, you can give your money to a PAC, and they're the experts. They'll know how to allocate it to different campaigns across the country to meet those goals. Um, so these non-super PACs, these traditional PACs, um, they have strict limits on how much you can contribute to them. So you can contribute, I think it's about $10,000, and then those PACs in turn can contribute $10,000 to candidates, and those go directly to the candidate committee. Um, and you have a few types. So you have the ideological PACs. So those could be, those are the ones, again, I don't punish in the formula. That could be Planned Parenthood has a PAC, the NRA has a PAC, certain human rights groups have PACs. Um, and then you have those corporate PACs, which I do give punishments. So Microsoft, basically that money comes from Microsoft employees. It's called a connected PAC because they're connected to that organization. But again, strict limits. They're only giving $10,000 maximum to candidates. And then you also have those leadership PACs, which are the PACs connected to members of Congress. Again, strict limits. All right, but all of those PACs are giving money directly to candidates. Then you have super PACs, um, also known as independent expenditures, which gives you kind of a cheat sheet on what they are. So, super PAC, there are no limits. You can give an unlimited amount of money to a super PAC, and the super PACs can in turn spend an unlimited amount of money trying to help, push whatever goal it is. It could be for a ballot initiative, it could be for a candidate, but that money is not going directly to the candidate or the candidate committee. They're running their ads, doing their events, whatever it is, independently. Um, does that always happen? Like, is there collusion? There's 100% collusion about, what kind of ad we want to run, when we want it to run. But officially, those sides are not allowed to talk. And so what you see is, how much influence can you have with $10,000 versus, half a billion dollars, right? It's just completely, there's an outside influence, an outsized influence on the super PAC side right now. So yeah, that's the main difference.
Yeah. And in terms of the ads that they run, I think they're campaign ads. That's what, if I were running for Congress, my campaign would run those. But then there are also independent ads that they're about, I think, like 12 words you cannot say in your ad, and suddenly it could be like an independent ad. I know this is not your area of expertise, but maybe if you could just briefly describe the main differences in those and how independent and just like issue based are the issue ads, or are there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So from my understanding, essentially, because members of Congress wrote the laws, they said, candidate, ads specifically by candidate committees for candidates, have to be offered the lowest unit rate that advertisers have offered in the calendar year. I think it's in the calendar year. So essentially, they said, like, you as long as there's inventory, you have to give us the lowest rate, which is a ridiculous law. But again, they got to write it. However, so that's if you're running for Congress, you have that lowest unit rate offered to you. If inventory is not available, then you start have to paying a higher rate. So issue ads, so that could be any group that's advocating for like a ballot initiative or something, anything that's not a candidate, or it could be one of these super PACs, these IEs, independent expenditures, that don't qualify for the candidate rates. They have to pay a higher rate. So there still is a benefit to raising a lot of money in your candidate committee, by a candidate, because you do get those lower rates. Issue rates can be really, really expensive. I mean, sometimes you're talking about like, I don't have the exact range, but 5x, something like that. I mean, you get a real discount with the candidate rates in some markets, because in some markets, there is inventory available, especially if it's like a primary in a district that's not usually competitive or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And just if people are interested, if you wanted to tell whether it was often like a super PAC or independently sponsored ad, or if it's an ad coming from a campaign, if somebody says, like the candidate says, I endorse this message, that's a campaign ad. And if it's sponsored by some kind of obscure organization, that's often would be a super PAC.
Yeah, and I love their names too. The super PACs. It's always like America. Like, I think Elon's is America First PAC or something like that. But they're always like Peace and Prosperity PAC. I love dogs and puppies PAC. Like, it's always just something, very positive and patriotic usually.
hmm Given that in your reviews, getting money from PACs costs these candidates points, what are your thoughts on PACs, and maybe there are some positives to them, but I also think mostly people don't like how they're operating. What are the main criticisms that you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you never want there to be a conflict of interest where a member of Congress will legislate on behalf of, especially like a corporate interest, instead of advocating for their constituents, which is why the formula has such a harsh penalty on corporate PACs. Um, uh, But as far as ideological PACs, a lot of it also does matter, and I do want to somehow get this incorporated into the formula, how the PACs are funded, right? Is this a PAC that's funded by billionaires and corporations, or is this a PAC that's funded by people that really care about animal welfare or really care about, whatever it is on the ideological PAC side? Um, and then you have these labor union PACs, and I don't think that personally, I don't issue a penalty there as well. If there's a collection of workers that want to pool their money together to advocate, for their dignity in the workplace, totally fine. So PACs have definitely gotten like a bad rap. Um, but I think that's important. What is the PAC advocating for? What conflict of interest would arise if the member of Congress took the money? And then how is that PAC itself funded? Because a lot of these PACs are funded by small individual donations. It kind of sounds like it wouldn't exist, but there are grassroots PACs, right? So it is kind of um it there's both sides of the PAC world.
Hmm. And what are your main criticism with the corporate PACs? And I guess from your reviews, is it mostly issue and ideology PACs that you're seeing, or overwhelmingly it is those corporate PACs?
I would say there's just not enough. I think there's only probably around 250 corporations that are really the contributing to candidates. So that if they all contributed the maximum, definitely on my math here, that'd be like $2.5 million. Um, so there's just so many more ideological PACs, and every union has a PAC as well. So it's definitely not the majority of the money that's coming from those PACs. In some ways, I think that makes it worse when a member of Congress takes a lot of that corporate PAC money, because in many cases they don't need it. But I think sometimes it just shows like this cognitive dissonance where they don't even realize that that's something they maybe shouldn't be doing, right? But there's such a presence, and my channel doesn't focus on this explicitly, but there's such a prevalence of lobbyists, um, in Congress, the amount of face time that they're having with people that represent these organizations, and then they turn around and they take $10,000 from those same corporations, and then they're holding stocks in those same corporations. At some point, it's not even that they're intentionally being corrupt. It's that this is it's kind of like, you judge someone off of who their friends are. This is who they're interfacing with all the time. This is the world that they're living in.
Yeah.
So in that way, like, I feel like there has to be a punishment. And we see it, again, my channel doesn't focus on this explicitly, but we see this in the way that they legislate, where there's, again, this cognitive dissonance where they don't really even understand what their constituents want. They're so wrapped up in this world because that's the only, message they're hearing oftentimes is exactly what these corporations are telling them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. When I was looking into this issue, something curious that I found is that PACs start affecting candidates even before they raise money from those PACs because uh, right now campaigns are so incredibly expensive. So even as you start talking publicly about what your policy are going to be, in the back of your mind, people are always thinking, am I going to make this corporation angry that they're never going to give me, or this corporation angry? So it's never necessarily PACs, even in so much like buying candidates and candidates changing their opinions. They already find people that ideologically align with them and then fund them a lot more. So in a way, like even before anybody receives any money, they're already influenced by it. So you constantly have to be watching your back. I want to talk about how your campaign is run, but from listening to some like testimonials, it's so hard to fundraise all of that money that you need for your campaign. So politicians are sort of always watching themselves. And it was interesting for me to sort of learn that uh, they're controlling you without giving you a dollar first. Um, I wanted to ask you about your experience working on a campaign. I think it was in Florida. If you just would like to share more about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, campaigns are super fun. If there's anyone out there that's like getting into politics, I definitely recommend working on the campaign side for a little bit. Yeah, so I worked on a campaign in Massachusetts, a congressional campaign, a Senate campaign down in Florida, and then on my most recent in the fall in the 2024 cycle, I was doing advertising, working with a bunch of different campaigns. Um, Campaigns are super dynamic. Like, it's a workplace that has come together in a matter of months. So they're almost always disorganized. But that means that, anyone can wear a bunch of different hats. There's going to be, kind of that next person up mentality. Um, but also at the same side, that kind of disorganization, and that, in a lot of campaigns, especially, I worked on campaigns where there was we were the challenger. We didn't have that. What would you call that? We didn't have that base of knowledge because this was our first time doing it. That's why the consultant world is so huge. And consultants, just like PACs, often get a bad rap, and there are bad consultants, but there's also you kind of need consultants. They're experts in these fields, and oftentimes you have a candidate who's really passionate and has a lot of great ideas. They might have a campaign manager. Um, who has a certain set of skills, but they also have their blind spots. And so when you raise money, you have to go to these consultants to get your ad run, or you're struggling to raise money, so you take out a loan and you hire some consultants because they're experts at raising money. Um, so I think from the outside, before I got into the campaign world, I just kind of assumed that there would be this level of competency, because it sounds so professional. You're running for Congress, you're running for the Senate, and it's not just the campaigns I worked on. That's just not how campaigns work. Campaigns are, there's a fire every day that you got to put out. They're going 1,000 miles an hour, and it's a lot of young people. It's sometimes the candidate might be an expert in one field or one policy area, but they're not omnipotent. They don't know everything. Um, so uh, yeah, there's it's kind of a crazy world, but that's really why consultants matter so much.
Mm-hmm. What were you personally doing for the campaign?
In Florida, I was kind of talking about that kind of next person up mentality. Within the last few months of the campaign, became the campaign manager. So I was originally doing some fundraising stuff, like writing scripts for our texts we were sending out, organizing people to do call time, things like that. But then in the campaign manager role, it was a small campaign, but still, had to onboard a few people. So, you're doing interviews. And then, we were a campaign that was struggling to fundraise. So basically the whole campaign was like a fundraising campaign that summer.
Mm-hmm.
So it was still kind of organizing people to do call time and, sending out texts to people, making sure the candidate was doing their call time, because that's really important. The candidate's always going to be the best fundraiser in the campaign, and they hate to be on the phones because they're usually these larger than life personalities that are really successful. But now they have to sit on the phone all day and make phone calls to random people. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough transition for them, but they are the best fundraiser. Um, so yeah, in a small campaign too, like the ones I worked on, these were, challenging campaigns that, uh, you know, didn't win their primaries, but were a lot of fun to work on. But you just wear so many different hats, and you as a campaign manager, you do role, you have job duties that maybe only interns would do in another campaign, but like you got to do it. And at the same level, in you also might have to do a job like before I was campaign manager that only someone in a management role would do, and you're like, I'm just a fundraiser here. Um, so again, campaigns are really fun. Yeah.
Nice. You mentioned that there are almost daily fires to put out. I'm just curious to know some of the examples you remember.
I mean, without getting too far into it, I mean, there's just personalities, right? Like you have 15 new coworkers and you're in this stressful environment. So again, I won't say what campaign or what it was, but like we had someone fire someone, and it was like, you can't fire them because you're not their boss. And then we had to like talk to both of them, and it was like, no, you're not fired, but like, why did you get fired? Like, we do have to talk about that. It's this whole thing. Um, because not only is uh not only is it kind of this new environment, it's a super stressful environment, right? And, people have this in NGO work as well, where um uh, or nonprofit work, whenever the mission of your work is something that you really deeply believe in, it can make the work really stressful. Because if you take a day off, you're not like, oh, the profit margins are going to go down a little bit. You're like, oh no, like I'm doing something immoral, right? Like this cause matters so much that I have to be on my A game all the time. So yeah, that can cause a lot of situations where, yeah, there's conflicts of personalities, but then, also sometimes someone might send a big tweet out and it has a typo in it. Or the candidate might say something, that contradicts a statement you put out, something like that. I mean, and then on the advertising side, we had a ton of fires. It was my first cycle. I started so many. I was an arsonist. I was starting fires left and right. You'd use the wrong rates when you sent out, an order, or send in an order with the incorrect inventory. I once sent out a radio order, um, like a Monday through Saturday radio order, and sorry, no, no, no. It was a weekend radio order, Saturday and Sunday. And I said, you should run this Saturday and Sunday, every day of the week. That's basically what I told them. And they said, we should run this Saturday and Sunday every day of the week. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, how are we going to run that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? And I was like, oh no, that doesn't make any sense. My order was completely contradictory. Yeah, so that just stuff like that happens. It's a fast-paced environment. People are really tired. People are really stressed out. Yeah.
Mhm. How do campaigns work? So, for example, we have the midterm election. When do people start assembling their teams? What are sort of like the first initial steps, and how does the campaign progress from there?
Yeah, so there's some campaigns that are already getting started up now, but it's a bit rare. Oftentimes, right now, it'd only be like a two-person team. So it would just be the candidate, maybe a campaign manager or campaign director, something like that. Um, and then what you also have right now is there's a lot of other players, state parties, or organizations like, um, uh, the DTRIP, Democratic Congressional. Oh, I'm going to forget all my three C's. But essentially, they're the ones who raise money and organize for the congressional candidates on the Democratic side. The Republicans have their version of that. So this is a time where they're kind of not selecting candidates, but they're kind of looking at the candidate fields, figuring out who they might want to support, who has the best chance of winning some competitive districts. Um, and so that's what you're seeing really right now. Once we get, maybe only just a few months from now, you'll see the team grow a bit. So you have your campaign manager, you have your finance director, because fundraising is really important at the start, of course. Um, but then once you get into the swing of things, I mean, it depends what the seat is. If it's a state level seat, it might really just be like a three-person team. It could be the candidate, finance director, campaign manager, and then one or two interns or something like that, or, someone's spouse, just, those really small teams. And then obviously once you get up to, like a Senate seat or something like that, you have these expansive teams, that, not only do you have teams that are working really hard on the candidate side, you have, teams working for PACs and they're not talking to each other, that are also creating advertisements and doing all this work to get that person elected.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, every campaign's different too, right? Like you might have someone that's running for the same level of seat, but they just allocate the resources differently. They decide that they're going to do, instead of like a big fundraising push, they're going to be the social media people. They're going to be so it really just depends on the campaign and the personality of the candidate. And at the end of the day, the candidate decides who gets hired and who gets fired. Um, obviously they delegate that to the campaign manager most of the time, but they have final say. So every campaign's different. And then, it depends what consultants they hire. That's going to, really change the outward perception of the campaign. If they hire good consultants that are actually, know how to do their job, or if they hire, their, you know, neighbors, friends, because they went to the same dinner party or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do campaigns spend money on? Is it just like hiring people and advertising?
Yes, I mean salaries are part of it, right? Like especially in a larger campaign, if you want to hire the best people, that's going to cost money. Um, an easy way to look at this, if you go to the FEC website and look up a candidate, I feel like almost everyone that does that looks at the or the incoming money, where they're getting their money from. But if you scroll down just a little bit, you can look at the disbursements, where they're spending the money. Yeah, it's a lot of salaries, it's a lot of advertising, it's events, right? They're paying for catering. they're paying for travel if they're, going to different parts of the district, or obviously in a presidential campaign if they're flying across the country. Um, I would say the main things though, it's advertising. I mean, whether that's digital advertising or what we call linear advertising, so that would be like TV and radio. Um, uh, you know, Oftentimes the campaign that has more money, especially once you get below a Senate level seat, so House seats, state seats, the candidate with the most amount of money wins those seats like 9 times out of 10. I don't know if that's the actual statistic, but it's a very high rate. And that's because they're able to get their message out more effectively. Every advertising dollar really does matter.
Yeah. From your experience, especially supervising the calling shifts, how much do constituents know about their congressman, for example? I feel like ads are so important because often people have really no idea what kind of issues people stand for.
Yeah, you nailed it. Like people really don't know, especially like who their member of Congress is, for example. I mean, even just starting my series, when I post a video and in the first few, I would say at the end, let me know who you want to grade next. And at that point, I was only doing members of Congress, and the amount of senators I got in the comments was incredible. And I would comment, "Oh, that's a senator. We're not doing them," and people were like confused and having debates in the comments. Or they would just say state. Like I would, say, let me know who you want to do next. And they'd be like Texas. Do the rep from do the congressman from Texas, or do the senator from Texas. It's like you guys have
How
more
many
than
are
one.
there? There are like so many.
Yeah, there's so many. Yeah, and you see that on the phones too. I was an intern in Congress, and you got a lot of phone calls there where people, obviously they knew who their member of Congress was. They were calling the office, but they would have their, and like a policy stance of the member of Congress completely flipped. Um, and I think that's why some people that are more deep into politics get so confused about political ads and what they're talking about. Like there's so many ads that were like Joe Biden is pro-choice. And some folks were like, why are we spending so much money on these ads that are saying Joe Biden is pro-choice? Isn't that, super on the face of things obvious? And then, you do polling where you say like, who's the pro-choice candidate? Is it Donald Trump or is it Joe Biden? And you get these wild, responses that you would never expect. And I think that's people can take advantage of that ignorance, right? That folks aren't paying attention. But at the same time, that it gives a little bit of optimism that, all right, we have a really weird media landscape right now with social media and digital media. Um, but we have to just bring people back into the fold where if we get people high quality information, we can start seeing a bit more, for example, in that situation, maybe people are voting in their interests, whatever they are. People are voting in their interests because they have more accurate information.
Mhm. When you're running a campaign and you want to put out the ads, how constrained you are in what you could say there? Because I think there are also a lot of misinformation ads, both on endorsing yourself and also um, against your opponent. Are there any constraints there, or?
So I didn't work on that side of things. I'm not sure exactly. I know that there's, as far as what you need to say, like disclaimers and stuff like that, we would send back ads all the time because it's something like the font isn't big enough on the disclaimer, or the disclaimer wasn't on the screen for 3 seconds. But as far as like uh, defamation or something like that, I'm not exactly sure.
So all you need to do is 3 seconds for a disclaimer.
I don't know if that was the exact time, but
Yeah.
there's all these requirements that the advertisements have to meet. I can't remember all of them, but for the candidate, I'd like they have to say their name. You also um, there has to be a likeness of the candidate in the ad. So oftentimes, if you see like an attack ad, where the candidate's not going to really be in the ad, right? Because they're attacking the other candidate. At the end of the ad in the disclaimer, there has to be like a little thumbnail rectangular picture of the candidate right next to the disclaimer. And it has to be a certain size and it has to be on the screen for a certain amount of time. So yeah, there's regulations like that.
Mm-hmm. How hard is it to fundraise? And do you think it's possible to really get enough money for some of the candidates without taking the PAC or corporate PAC funds.
Yeah, it's really hard to raise money, but I would say I kind of mentioned this earlier. Not much of the money is coming from corporate PACs. We're talking about maybe again a maximum of $1 million. But most candidates, and these are not even just candidates, these are members of Congress, and those are the people who are really more likely to be getting these corporate donations because they're established. The corporations know that most likely they're going to be, in Congress for a while or at least for the next term. They're only getting $100,000, $200,000
Mm.
of corporate PAC money, and they're raising $3 million, $2 million, something like that. It's definitely possible. For me, again, it's not even just about will their campaign fall apart if they didn't get this corporate funding. It's about why do they even think it's necessary to take $40,000 of corporate PAC money, right? Like, where's again, it's this cognitive dissonance where it's like you should, if you don't need it, don't take it. I feel like it's just eh, and also I feel like they don't understand that they would get brownie points with their constituents. That's one of the things that infuriates me is I feel like this series has proven that it's people do care about this. They would get some recognition for that if it was public. It's something they could put on their website. It's something they could champion. They don't even think of it as something beneficial, just because they're so locked into this world of lobbyists and corporate money. Um, Sorry, what was the question?
If it would be possible to run the campaign, like first without PACs and then second without corporate
Yeah,
PACs, I didn't know there is such a small share of money that comes from corporate PACs.
it's small, but then at the same time, they might only get $10,000 from the corporate PAC of, X corporation, but they might get $120,000 from individuals who work at that corporation. And those could be C-suite employees, those could be people on the board of that organization. So that it isn't to say that there isn't some cozying up to corporations that definitely does help fundraising, right? Because you do if you're legislating in the best interests of corporate interests and whatnot, you are going to get a lot of wealthy individuals that are going to contribute to your campaign, not through the PAC. Um, so, but it definitely is still possible. I think we're seeing that grassroots fundraising really is the future. Now that we have like avenues like social media to reach so many different people. Um, and not even just in your district, right? Like you can get people to contribute to your campaign nationwide through the use of social media, which is a double-edged blade because you're doing a great job fundraising. But we always someone in my old organization, their like motto was always when they talk to candidates was, "Do you want to be famous or do you want to win this election?" Right? Because you can raise a lot of money outside of your district, but if you're focused on social media, then you might not actually be talking locally enough.
Yeah.
Um, but on the fundraising side, I think it's definitely possible, but people also need to get with the new wave of how to advertise. And, that's not gonna, it's still gonna look like a lot of TV and radio. I think people actually in my generation undervalue how important that stuff still is. Um, but you're also going to be doing a lot of digital advertising where you're targeting small individual donors.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm actually curious to get your thoughts on it. I think I actually viewed quite negatively when somebody who's representing a certain district or a state is getting money from a different state. I feel like people from that other state have no business sort of influencing who gets to represent Idaho, for example. Um, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's totally fair. I think the other way of looking at it would be like they're running for federal office, right? They're going to be voting on legislation that impacts the whole country. Um, but no, I mean I see that in my comments all the time. How much of their money is coming from out of state. Um, but it always comes back to this for me, which is where's the conflict of interest, right? What kind of behavior is this going to um, what kind of behavior could this open this politician up to? And also, what would abstaining from that look like? Um, so, like, I just wouldn't expect, for example, a politician to reject funds that were coming from out of state. And I can't, and I also I find it harder to find the direct benefit. But at the same time, it definitely would make me more confident and comfortable with that candidate, right? If all of their money's coming from out of state, I don't like that. And for ballot initiatives, that's a big thing, and it's a talking point in a lot of advertisements about ballot initiatives. Um, they'll say, you know, all of the money for vote yes on two is coming from outside of our, small rural state. And that will be like the key point of the advertisement, basically saying like, you know, they're trying to change our state constitution
Sorry, what are
with
ballot
outside funds.
initiatives?
Yeah, so that would be like uh it depends on the state what it requires to get it on the ballot, but it's usually marijuana legalization has been done through ballot initiative. There's been some abortion-related ballot initiatives. I think in most states, something has to get a certain amount of signatures, and then it goes on the ballot with the candidates. And then in some states, it has to get a simple majority, just 50 plus 1% of the votes. And then in other states, it has to be like 60-40. And some states, they have ballot initiatives about whether it should be 50-50 or 60-40. So basically, just things you can vote on, issue-based things that will affect the state constitution or state laws of your state. Um, and those they pay those issue rates. When I was saying, that the candidates get the discounted rate on those ballot initiatives, you have to pay that full issue rate, so they're a bit more expensive. And it is true, like sometimes you do have out of state money trying to influence a state level ballot initiative.
Yeah, yeah. Because I see donation, like to win the election, you need money. So sort of there's such a direct correlation to funds to the votes that you're going to get. So it's almost as if people from other state are almost like indirectly voting in that state that they like don't belong to. That's my personal um, view. I also understand that they're just congressmen and senators. They're nation like famous, and I guess everybody wants to have them in place. So I don't have a strong opinion, but just intuitively doesn't quite make sense to me. Um, I wanted to also talk about another part of your formula, which is trading stocks. I personally didn't know that that was legal until I started watching your series, because often these people would be sitting on a variety of committees and they would be directly trading stocks that they pretty much have insider information about. What do you know about sort of rules and restrictions there?
Yeah, so there are some people do think it's kind of the Wild West on the opposite side of that. They think, they can do whatever they want. Um, I think one of the major regulations that has been put into place is just the reporting that they do have to do. So they have to report after 45 days, they have to report the trades that they've made. Um, and that gives us a bit more transparency, but it doesn't actually prevent them from trading the stocks. They can still do it. It's just a reporting requirement. And when I look at members of Congress trading individual stocks, I think there's two pieces of it for me. There's the unfairness aspect that they do have this insider information, and in many industries, we recognize that, and we make sure that they can't trade individual stocks. If you work for Goldman Sachs or something like that, if you work for one of these financial institutions, there's restrictions on whether you can buy and sell individual stocks. If you work for certain government agencies, if you're not an elected official, if you're those unelected bureaucrats, you can often not trade individual stocks. Our members of Congress, however, can. And they have more information than they have different information and still inside information, even compared to those other industries. So
Yeah.
there's the unfairness aspect, but then there's also this very similar to accepting corporate funds. There's a conflict of interest aspect where I heard in my videos, some people in my comments would say, well, as long as they don't trade the individual stock, it's fine. If they just hold it and it's just in their retirement fund, that's fine. I actually have a bigger problem with that, because that's where the real conflict of interest arises, where they might start legislating for the corporations in their stock portfolio and not for their constituents. Especially, I mean, some members of Congress have like millions of dollars in two or three corporations. And so if you're telling, if you have $5 million in Apple and someone says, hey, there's a new bill coming across. I mean, Congress used to do the tariffs, not the president, right? Let's say there's a new tariff that's being introduced. It's going to be, it's going to affect, smartphone sales. Um, you know, it's going to really protect consumers, but it's going to really tank Apple's stock. If that member of Congress who's 80, they're close to retirement, they have $4 million of Apple stock, right? That, I mean, even if it doesn't actually impact the decision they make, it's a conflict of interest, and that's what we're trying to weed out. Um, so there's two sides of things. There's an unfairness aspect, and then there's a conflict of interest when it comes to members of Congress trading stocks. And if they're on a committee, I mean, come on, that's just even a more direct conflict of interest right there.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's first of all, it's just free money. I think there was an example. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure Nancy Pelosi was on one of these committees that was investigating Google. And a couple of days before Google was sued, I think she sold her stock or shorted the company. And it's free money. You have information that nobody else has. And yeah, I think the Stock Act sort of requests that they don't trade. Kind of along with what they're investigating, what committee they're on. But
Mm.
fortunately, we still see this activity happen a lot. And it seems like they're not getting that much backlash for it. I mean, it's pretty much like an open, like everybody knows that it's wrong, but still, if you do it, you could get reelected.
Yeah. And again, it is still the minority of members of Congress that are trading the individual stock, which poses an opportunity. Like there's been stock trading bans that have had momentum in Congress before. Because if you're a member of Congress that doesn't trade individual stocks and that comes across your desk, it's not like you're getting a bunch of phone calls from your constituents saying, I really want you to trade individual stocks. That's not happening, right? So there is an opportunity there as long as members of Congress know that their constituents care about it. Because if members of Congress all voted right now on a stock trading bill based on if they hold or don't hold individual stocks, a stock trading ban would pass. But I feel like right now it's just not a priority. They they'll co-sponsor a bill, they'll write a press release on how they're co-sponsored it, but there's no urgency to actually get that bill to the floor.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think there were a lot of initiatives to do something around it, but it just doesn't seem to pass. And I was thinking about it, like we see all the activity that individual legislators like trading activity, but they also have children and spouses, and uh,
Mm.
I think a comprehensive bill would ban kind of the entire family from trading anything else than like mutual funds or something where they don't have direct control over what gets purchased. But I feel like probably more, as my personal conspiracy, I guess, more than we know, they're uninterested in actually having this bill passed. But we will see. There's been lots of talk that they might pass it. Um, I yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think I learned so much. I had one more question for you. If you were able to pass one law, what would it be and why?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me on. This was great. Well, I can cheat a little bit, and that's Ro Khanna. I don't have the name of the bill or the HR number in front of me, but if you go to his congressional website, you'll be able to find it. Ro Khanna introduced a very comprehensive bill. It covered stock trading for members of Congress. It covered accepting corporate funds. It was this very comprehensive anti-corruption bill. It also had a lobbying provision. So if after 2 years out of Congress, I think it increased the amount of time that you couldn't, start lobbying, something like that. So I could cheat. I could say that one because it's like five different policies. But I would really say I think we should start with the stock trading ban. It's something that is, um, it's possible. It's almost been done before. It would include a ban. Um, it would include banning the spouse or dependent children from holding or trading individual stocks. I think the members of Congress who make $176,000 a year, I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to still make enough money. But yeah, I think we can get that done. And I'm hoping that this series can just, increase the amount that people are paying attention. And then hopefully we can take that attention, steer it towards Congress, and maybe get something done in the next few years.
Perfect. I think that's a great one. I supported myself as well. If people wanted to follow you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so I'm everywhere. I'm finding Nico46 on TikTok. You can find me on Instagram with the same handle, YouTube, but also make sure to check out my Substack. That's where I'm doing some longer form content. That's where you can find the spreadsheet with all the grades of members I've graded so far. So yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone there.